Thank you for having me here. I had most of you may not know Rachel. Rachel is my boss in Tallahassee, and she's my chief aide, and she tells me to bring my reading glasses and to do a slideshow that I don't really do well with slideshows, and she's probably got something very sophisticated behind this one. But you've seen all the slides because most of those were the slides from our report. So what I would like to talk about today is just give a little bit about my background. I was elected into the Senate in 2012. My farm is in Trilby, which is right next to the Withlacoochee River, right there, just north of Dade City, or nobody knows where Dade City is, maybe 45 minutes north of Tampa. And I grew up on that farm, and my initial in running for the Florida Senate, we were very interested in our springs and spring sheds. I have a place at Homosassa Springs that I like to go out and we fish and scallop and lay around the river and on the weekends during the summertime. And so I had interest in water policy, but as we looked as entering the Senate, it was about the Everglades, my first year in the Senate. I was very fortunate to sponsor that bill, the Everglades Restoration Act. So once I started getting into the meat of the bill and dealing with the mechanisms that it would take to restore the Everglades, what we hope is back to final water quality, that bill's an $880 million spending bill over 10 years. We started that 3 years ago, those reconstruction projects, and right now we're ahead of schedule, and there's a lot of very promising stories that we're hearing on the advancement of those causes. And remember, when we're talking about the Everglades, everyone here probably knows that's a third of our population receives its drinking water. It's an eighth wonder of the world. It's the only place in the world where crocodiles and alligators come together. And we're very proud that we're making a major investment, as many previous legislatures have, to restore the Everglades. I think you're going to see a lot more attention in that area. President-designate Negron, in his speech a few weeks ago, talked about the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee and the STAs. I think it's C-43 and C-44 estuaries, or the STAs are going to be being built. Those are very important to that area, and so you're going to see a lot of attention on those areas this year. You're growing up in Trilby, my dad, and I lost my dad and my mom probably, one of them 3.5, 4 years ago, and the other one about 8 months later, at a very young age. But my dad's idea of getting permits or digging ditches or digging ponds on our property is if the machine cranked, we had a permit. And all of that, of course, changed in 1983 or 4 or 5 when we got our first visit from Swiftmud and decided we shouldn't be doing those things on our property. And so that was some of our first experiences with water policy in the state of Florida. I go back to the early 80s with my dad. And anyways, as your senator, so reclaimed water and groundwater and being in the agricultural business is something that's very important. Just until a few years ago, agriculture was the #1 user of potable water. And now we're no longer the #1 user. Our population is well over 20 million now. We're growing at 1,000 people a day. If you went back and you read the 06 and 05 reports, we were going to be out of water now because of the projected growth at that time. We'd have 23 or 4 million people today instead of 20 million, right? If we'd have kept on that bubble pace of growth. When you look around the state of Florida, what was the birth of 536, Senate Bill 536, was all about the 700 or 800 million gallons of reclaimed water that is going to go out into the Gulf or the Atlantic today, right? It did yesterday, and it's going to today, and it's going to tomorrow. And we've had some really good opportunities. Our local communities are doing very well at trying to use that water, but those waters are not where we need them. The water is not where it can be utilized year-round. And there's such a beneficial use of reclaimed water throughout the state. And then the question is how do we get that how do we get the water where we need it? Well, when I first started putting this program together, I thought that if we had a series of very large reservoirs through the spine of the state, and then we had a mechanism, pipes and pumps, to get that water to those reservoirs. Then those local communities could utilize that water and sell it for landscape, for their utilities, would you work on that water, perhaps reclaiming wetlands, and other uses like that. And of course, agriculture, in my mind, has a very large place with reclaimed water. If we could utilize those 700 or 800 million gallons today, if we had the technology and the infrastructure, of course that would save 700 or 800 million gallons of groundwater pumping. And so for me, I'm thinking that this is a perfect way that the state needs to put resources to deliver that water where we need it. If you follow what's going on in California, major droughts, multiple year droughts, Florida could find itself in that position in the next 2 or 3 years. We've been blessed the last 2 years. It looks like El Nino is doing a great job, and for this year and perhaps next. But we've, over the last 10 or 15 years, have really still been in drought conditions relative to our historic rainfall. So for Florida's growth that's coming, and you can hear numbers we're going to have in another 20 years, we'll be over 30 million in population. We know how important agriculture is, not only to our economy. We talk about agriculture sometimes, as an economic engine, and it is. It's the second leading driver of the economy today, only second to tourism. But the reality is what we eat. Do we really want to export all of our food from somewhere else in the world? And I think not. And it's such a major, has such a heritage in Florida and such a opportunity to be sustained in the state of Florida. Reclaimed water can go a long ways to providing that water resource that we need for agriculture as other opportunities. So that was the reason that 536 come along. When I looked at the water bill this year, I wanted to briefly touch on before we start taking questions. Senator Dean, Chairman of the Environmental Committee, I'm the Vice Chair of that committee, put that bill together, the Springs bill together a few years ago. And there were several senators that participated in what we call our Springs legislation. And it was Senator Dean at the lead, Senator Simmons, myself, Senator Hayes, and Senator Mumford. And so we had spent a lot of time my first year talking about the Everglades, which is extremely important to the balance, the ecosystem of the state of Florida. But we had not put the proper attention on our spring sheds. Well, I believe the water bill that just passed and was just signed yesterday by the governor actually now gives us a statewide opportunity to set statewide water policy, to clean up through agriculture using BMPs, which has to be approved by the Department of Agriculture, by dealing with our septic tank issues, mostly along our coastal and areas, obviously. And then when you look at the BMP process, we're actually now going to have a statewide opportunity to know what's causing the pollution. The other thing we have going for us today in that bill is that we now have technology that can tell us where the pollution's coming from, right? In other words, there's no more guessing. 20 years ago, we had reasonably good technology, but today we can speciate where the pollution's coming from, and we can go get at that source. So I'm very proud of the water bill that was put in place this year. I think it's comprehensive. I don't believe it's going to be the exact same position it will be 5 years from now. There are going to be things that we need to do to make it a better bill, and we'll be looking for those opportunities in the next few years. But nonetheless, I think it's a very good start. Last few points I'll make on the reclaim, and then I'll be glad to take any questions. When you look at reclaimed water, and I've talked to Lynn and others many times on this issue, the question is when should be the end date that the state of Florida no longer allows reclaimed water to go in the Gulf or the Atlantic? And this is where everybody generally starts paying attention if you're a county or a city that does these things. And I think it should be much sooner than later. Maybe 2020 would be a good number to start, or 2018. And of course, everybody in the room that works for a county just lost their breath. And but the reality is we're going to have to pick a date, and it's not going to be 15 or 20 years from now. It won't be 2018 either, by the way. But I always like to start that way, and we can always back up. The other parts is we have to learn to, as we use this reclaimed water for the beneficial uses. By the way, my example earlier about all those reservoirs, And the more education I've learned on this issue, clearly we have plenty of storage in our current aquifer, primarily, reclaiming wetlands, saltwater intrusion. This one really, I think this is a major opportunity where we can use reclaimed water to stop saltwater intrusion around the state. We can eliminate saltwater intrusion by the use of reclaimed water. So I am open to all of those kinds of ideas. We are going to be working on this right after session this year. I did not have an opportunity once the report had been released and to gather data from scientists and industry. I didn't have enough time to put a good bill together. And so my idea is as soon as session's over, of course, as soon as it's over, I will not officially have a new district until November, but obviously all of us are going to be on the ballot again in 2016. Every senator will be on the ballot, and for the Senate, that's unusual. We get a 4-year term, so we have a time to study and have more longer-term opportunities to deal with issues. And since I've been elected in 12, I ran in 12, I ran in 14, I get to run in 16. So I'm a House member by elections, but a senator in the legislature. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on this, but in this particular reclaimed water bill, I wanted to be as comprehensive as the Everglades bill, as comprehensive as the water bill that we just passed and is now law. And so I'm going to be reaching out to folks in this room and industry to help me put that water bill together. I am not an expert on any of these issues, so I don't claim to be an expert. My intention here is to put Florida in a position over the next few years, and I think the water bill was a very large step of that. I think the Everglades restoration was a very large step. I think all of the projects that we're talking about, regional projects, I've not gotten into a lot of that, but, prioritizing regional water supplies. All of those things are on the table, and all of those things can be discussed as part of the reclaimed water bill and how we put a package together, obviously with stormwater and other types of water that we can use for our future drinking water. Realizing that Florida is growing, I think we're going to exponentially outgrow the population of the state will continue to grow with all the opportunities we have in Florida with our job initiatives, our ports, our widening, the Panama Canal's opening. I think you're going to see a lot more manufacturing here in the state. It's going to bring the population to the state of Florida. Florida, again, we're back to 1,000 a day. Water is the #1 issue for the state of Florida. And so without that, that's going to completely eliminate every driver of the economic engine that we have. So I'm very proud to work on this, and I'll be glad to try to answer a few questions if there are.
So, and then you talked a little bit about your collaboration with other senators in this area, but can you advise us really what knowledge base Wilton has, some of our leaders are on our resources, and what we can do to better collaborate with you on what we're facing?
Yes, and the question is who should we be collaborating with in the legislature to help move forward these causes? And in the Senate, we're going to be losing Chair Dean, the senator that put the water bill for us this year, Charlie Dean. We're going to be losing him. Senator Simmons will still serve in the Senate, would probably have a big input on this bill. Senator Montfort has been very helpful on this bill from the Panhandle. And there are numerous senators that are interested in this bill. And I would think that, I presume that most of us live from South Florida to North Florida. I think that engaging your local senators from local experts would be very important for helping this cause. This is going to be revolutionary, I believe, as it relates to beneficial uses of reclaimed water. You're going to have some very big opponents of this opportunity, because whoever's putting the water today in the Gulf or the Atlantic, and we know who they are, there's going to be some heartburn, right? There's going to be some, if we're buoying the aquifer by eliminating saltwater intrusion, so how much water do you get for putting 100 million gallons into the aquifer? How much do you get back out? And so there's going to be a lot of very, very tough questions, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities for us to have to educate our senators and representatives. We know the incoming speakers, Speaker Corcoran. Speaker Designate Corcoran today. He's a good friend. He's from Pasco County, so we're kind of close, and I'm hoping he's going to be very supportive of these issues. But we're going to need both bodies engaged. So any of your House members you can engage, all of your senators that you can engage, and then I would think probably the focus of this, I would presume Senator Simmons, myself, if Senator Hayes is serving, him also, and Senator Mumford would probably take the lead in this area.
When your vision moving forward, we're looking at cessation of discharges and need to use that excess 55% of reclaimed water that's not used today. And that, what is your vision, and is there an incentive that you're looking at to move that forward?
Yeah, the question is there going to be incentives? So are there going to be carrots and sticks, or just sticks? And no, there's going to be incentives, and I think one of the biggest incentives will be is that in some of the areas where you have a lot of reclaimed water, you do not have saltwater intrusion. But 20 miles in either direction, there's substantial saltwater intrusion. So the fact is if we use that reclaimed water for that purpose, or to restore wetlands, or for agricultural purposes and stop a lot of groundwater pumping in the region, what do we give back for that use? And I would say that clearly there's going to be you put so many gallons in, you get so many back. The argument is going to be, what's the percentage? And I think in some cases, some folks would say, well, we'd love to get 90% more groundwater capacity. If we're putting in 100 million gallons, we want 90 million gallons that we can pump. And the number I'm going to start at is 40%. And so where we probably end. But this is going to be a tug of war. But the reality is and I really am not a real expert in a scientist or a geologist. I'm an egg farmer most of the time. And I'm going to be looking for people in the room to make sense of those arguments and give us the data and the support data, because what drives my decision making is science. So when we use good science to make decisions on water policy, we generally get it right. And I don't use emotion to govern myself. So I think there's lots of incentives that are going to be available. In addition to that incentive about additional groundwater pumping, there's going to be priority funding, through DEP, through your basin boards. There's going to be priority funding for regional applications of regional water supplies and so on. So I think you're going to see more of we're getting rid of the lines that currently exist between our 5 basin boards. We're going to be looking to have priority opportunities for regional projects.
Florida has some pretty innovative agricultural programs, like Swiftmont has a farms program. South Florida, Florida Management District has an NEPES program. It seems to me like these programs would be good statewide. Is there any impetus to kind of expand those programs throughout the state?
Yes. Speaking of agriculture, and I'll give you one example that I am very familiar with and I've just experienced myself. I'm one of those farmers that can't get enough of farming, so about 1.5 years ago, I planted 40 acres of navel oranges in Dundee, Florida. And you can look this guy up on Shark Tank. It was Johnny George's that built a tree teepee that goes around any type of a plant, but this just happens to be an orange tree. And the week before I planted the trees, I had 1 week before I could get the tree teepees put around my trees and the water sensors to let us know that we had enough water around the roots. And we would have to run those pumps 4.5 to 5 hours to have enough water around the tree. And it's because the water's going everywhere, including around the tree. When I put the tree teepees on, we now run those same pumps about 35 minutes. Almost out of 85-90% reduction of water usage. And we're streamlining where that water is going. Right around the root of that tree, the nutrients, the fertigation, as we use that in that same process, we're eliminating runoff, nutrient runoff. So these are very, very substantial projects. As it relates to tailwater recovery, We have those incentives throughout, and there are programs throughout the state like those, and the answer is yes. We want to continue to incentivize agriculture to use less water. Last year, we removed the sales tax off of irrigation equipment, trying to incentivize upgrade of irrigation equipment. The example I just gave is revolutionary because you can use this on any type of tree. You can use it on any type of a plant. Now, these are being sold worldwide now, and all throughout the Middle East where there's no water, nearly no water, they're using these. They're as fast as they can make them. It's, it's a worldwide phenomenon now. It started in Polk County, Florida. And so this is something that's very important that agriculture continue to do its part. This is one example, and there's lots of examples with tailwater recovery and STAs on farms, using farms for natural water storage. Around the lake, there's a lot of private landowners that, when all those areas were dredged, are very easily contained now to where we can store hundreds of millions of gallons of water on private land. You can't use it for orange trees right now, but we're still going through greening. It's been a disaster. And so why not utilize those opportunities also? So we're encouraging the basin boards and DEP to continue to look for those opportunities. And in addition to looking for the opportunities, we're putting substantial dollars of state revenue behind those projects. So I think it's a great idea to continue.
It's very interesting. I want to bring you back to that day in spring 2014 when the kickoff meeting, the Senate Bill 536 kickoff meeting in the Swift office. And because you proposed the concept of the reservoir idea. And some of the concepts that came out of the meeting was, we've got a massive natural reservoir system and conveyance system right underneath us. And your initial reaction was, ew, you're going to put reclaimed water in a drinking water system? So it's exciting to see that through looking at science and through researching it and education, that minds can change. And so hopefully we can get there.
Yes, and that was a very good point. When you start saying to people from me, I'm not going to say from anywhere, with the notion we're going to put reclaimed water back in the aquifer where you presume the other water comes from, or fresh water, it's kind of like, yeah, that's not going to work out. We're going to put this in reservoirs above the ground, and we're going to be very careful where this water goes. Keep them separate. And but the truth of the matter is that what I said earlier about science-based opportunities. This group here that's in front of me and industry is going to drive this discussion. And so in the last year or so, as I've met with various groups, the notion of why are we just not using it, the idea of saltwater intrusion, perhaps eliminating saltwater intrusion, that's extremely fascinating, because as everyone in this room knows, as you do that, you buoy the aquifer all the way across the state. And so the more of the opportunities like that we have, I believe that's going to be in my guesstimation, the more simple the solution is, or the more simple the idea is, probably the more effective it's going to be. So yes, it was a major change of, after being educated, major change of thought process.
Senator, you spoke a little bit about the funding, and we know that you understand the kind of money that it takes to keep these projects going. But do you think that there's the understanding and the appetite to help this move to the next step in government and local government and in Tallahassee?
Yes, from a funding perspective, I do believe there's going to be the willpower in Tallahassee to put state resources in this area. We can talk about Amendment 1. As a person now, as a senator, I'm against constitutional amendments. I'm going to run one in a few years that says we're going to take off the last 6 or 8 we've put on. And so that's the one I'm for. But the people have spoken, and I'm very proud to the way in which we're using the Amendment $1 for, where the reality is it was about $700 million last year that we're using of Amendment 1 money for projects and buying property. We spent over $3 billion on projects though. So in other words, there was plenty of opportunity if Amendment 1 money had been greater than $700 million for projects. And so I think now that the basin boards, the DEP, they can see these things happening, right? 536 happened a year and a half ago. It took a study. It took us 18 months to get the study. we are seeing the direction we're going in. Springs funding goes from 15 million 3 years ago to 30, I believe, to 50. That's going to continue to increase. My question is on most of these is that I like the bigger, larger regional impact type projects to really eliminate large swaths of pollution, create large opportunities to develop regional water supplies. So I have, just like I did in the Brooksville meeting, I want to think big on these issues. We all could do 100 projects, at $1 million or $2 million a piece, but the one $400 million project might take care of 80% more problem. And so I'm hoping that that message is resonating. We were told last year if we did more than $50 million in Springs funding that we really didn't have the projects available in the pipeline to fund. And so what I believe is happening today is that now those projects are coming to the forefront and they're developing the projects. And I believe that the state will take significant opportunities of increasing funding in these areas to protect our springs. I did an editorial a few months ago and talked about this. This state is completely unique from Pensacola to the Keys. I'm doing a bill this year, the Keys Stewardship Act, $25 million a year for 10 years to help make sure that the Keys are taken care of, buying lands that cannot be built on. The state has restricted those areas, making sure their canals and around the Keys are completely restored, and then the reclaimed water and water supplies for the Keys. That's a bill that we're doing this year that sets a $25 million limit for 10 years. That's what they've asked for, that would bring the Keys back to complete restoration. In my area of the state, when you talk about springs and you're talking about Kings Bay, Homosassa Springs, Weeki Wachee, and so on, there's tens of millions of dollars a project in that area of restoring those springs. I believe you're going to see those projects being funded, is my prediction.
Yes.
Can you give us your vision on what you would like to see in your draft rule based on the report?
Based on what the final bill would look like? So the final bill will, and I'm just going off of a bad memory here, but when you look at the reclaimed water, I believe there's going to be a series of opportunities or co-opportunities where local governments, from cities to counties to regional areas are going to be incentivized to use their reclaimed water. We know where the reclaimed water obviously is, that we need to get infrastructure put together. I think that significant state dollars will be put towards regions that are working together. I think we're going to have to define who owns the reclaimed water, because at some point there's going to be like, hey, there's this big value here and everybody's got to pay for it now, and one entity owns it, right? And I'll just use the city of Tampa for an example. They own their reclaimed water, so they should get a lot of money for it if we're going to start using it somewhere else in the state. And then I think the opposite side of that is we may say something to the effect so that it's easier to negotiate that, okay, well, that may be true, but you only have until 2020 to not put any more in the Gulf. And I think when you line the end date of the opportunity to use that with the notion that we're willing to incentivize you to do the right thing in your region or across the state, I think those two are going to be the two pressure points. And so the series of opportunities to do the right thing with the notion that there is an end date coming, this is not going to be an indefinite thought or an indefinite study. I think those 2 points will bring everybody to the room, and there will be a very good strategy developed out of those 2 opportunities. And I think from a regional perspective, the bill's going to be looking at statewide, not any specific region. So we're going to allow the local governments, local scientists, local engineers to tell us what the best way to fix their unique areas are. It's much different in my area than Miami, for instance. How do you get that reclaimed water up the beach? And that's going to be, we're probably going to find out in the next few years.
Earlier, we saw a presentation on agriculture and the amount of water that's available within 5 miles, amount of reclaimed water that's available to farmers that farm within 5 miles of wastewater treatment plant. That was upwards of 800 million gallons a day. But as it played out, it said they won't use it because of the yuck factor. Just like you had a yuck factor and, talked about the aquifers and where the reclaim could go. Are you anticipating a use in getting over that yuck factor with ag so that they can release some water?
There's a couple of ideas I have with ag, and having a little bit of an ag background, I think there's two factors that farmers look at when we're talking about using reclaimed water. A lot of farmers have a certain amount of capacity per day they can use, that they've been permitted to use, and they have a permit for 20 or 30 years. And let's just say for easy numbers, that's 1 million gallons a day. And all of a sudden, my local municipality says, you know what, if you'll just take this reclaimed water, we'll give you your 600,000 gallons a day you're using, and for your application, you can use that. I think it's more about the idea that we will lose the total amount of gallons that we have permitted daily more than the yuck factor. So I think the yuck factor exists, but I think the big factor in the room is don't take my water away from me if I use reclaimed water, because I may change my farming techniques a year or two from now. I may have a low water intensity crop this year, but 2 years from now I may have a high intensity water crop. And so I think there's got to be a balance there. And so one of my ideas, and this is just an idea as it relates to agriculture, if agriculture has 1 million gallons a day use, and a local municipality can get that water to them through reservoir piping, however we have to do that, and they can use that water, that we could reduce that permit from 1 million gallons a day down to say 200,000 gallons a day, reduce it 80%. But for that reduction, the payment for that reduction is the reclaimed water. And so I would look for those are some ideas that I have thought about. And so that any time that the local government then would want to charge for the water, sort of as they've done in the Orlando area, then your water use permit would automatically renew for 30 years at the original amount that you were entitled to. So there'll be a tripwire there. So can farmers use reclaimed water? Well, I think, will they openly use it? Yes. And I think that there's going to be an educational process, and I think that then there's going to have to be the ideal of getting rid of all of these users with all these, million gallons, 5 million gallons a day use permits. We can finally draw those down because we're going to have reclaimed water to replace it. That's just a thought that I've had. It's you'll hear more of that as we go forward.
Senator, I just want to thank you for being here. Paul Steinbrecher with JEA. And I just want to make this group available to you over time as you move forward. You sort of have one-stop shopping this is the group of water professionals in the state, either they're utility, water resource folks, or consultants who do this work, or others associated with it. We've got the president in the room today. And this group and its associated utility council can provide you in the coming months with the relative economics of different types of reuse, so that you've got kind of one view of it and you don't have to hear 80 different voices on it. So that's a resource we can provide. We're willing to do that.
Yeah, and that's very, very important. And thank you for even saying that, because I think that, and I'm putting everybody on notice now, say by mid-May, early June, we could have that series of thoughts and some documentation on the direction that you would see this bill going in. What I always tell folks is pretend like there's no barriers, that cost is not an object, that our opportunities are limitless, and don't try to fit in your own box, because Hillsborough is different from Duval, is different from Miami. But if we can come up with a series of policies from this group, this would be very important for us as a good starting place. And I would say we need to have something substantially put together by October, November this year. We will not have committee meetings because of all the, everyone will have to see who gets reelected. So this would not be taken up until after November the 5th or 6th or the election day. But as soon as election day is over, we need a comprehensive bill that's put together, it's been vetted through this organization, all the organizations that are represented here, our industries, and local communities to make sure that we've got something that what happens is, and you all know this, is if you follow the legislation, it's very much like a sausage-making opportunity, right? So we're gonna start with something, and someone is gonna scream really loud. 4 or 5 people are gonna scream really loud on this one. And so there's gonna be a negotiation, there's gonna be a give and take. So the more input we can have up front from all vested parties, the less of those type of, opportunity, the less of the arguing we do in December and January. And as a state senator, I have found that if you allow the experts to help you put these things together, you have less of that. When I did this was a really a great moment I'm very proud of. In the first stop of the Everglades Restoration Act, Senator Lappdala, for everyone that doesn't know, is very interested in these type of issues, and he's from Pinellas County. He was sitting in the environmental committee that year, I believe it was, first stop, and no one in the room objected to the bill, and everybody stood up and supported the bill. And he stopped the meeting and said, "Are you telling me is the Everglades Foundation here, and is the Sierra Club and other groups?" And they were all there, of course. And he said, "Well, I need them to come up to the microphone and tell me they really support this bill." And in that bill, by the way, it wasn't everything they wanted. It wasn't everything that industry wanted, but it was something that was put together, that was comprehensive, that made sense for that region of the state of Florida. And that's ultimately what I want to do with this bill. We do not want to put draconian bills together because we can. We don't want to play games because sometimes that's what happens. We want this to be very serious, and what I hope we start with is very close to what we end with. And this is too important an issue to play those kind of games with. So I appreciate your comments, and I'm looking forward to this group participating with that bill. All right, well, thank you for having me here